What's up guys, the Strong Boys 19 here. This is going to be, I guess, a long ramble than a proper review around a brand new release, a re-recording in fact, from former Pink Floyd musician and lyricist Roger Waters. He decided to make the announcement many months back that he was going to re-record one of the world's biggest albums, that being this magnum opus for music history and music success, The Dark Side of the Moon. And as you guys have already seen my reviews around Pink Floyd's discography, they were very favourable for a lot of the albums, and citing Dark Side of the Moon to me as one of the classics. But when I had heard the news around Roger Waters re-recording the entire album to celebrate the milestone of Dark Side's anniversary, I was very negative towards it. I was against it. And with what Roger Waters did say, claiming that the other members of Pink Floyd are not musicians, that really rubbed everything completely the wrong way. And it was something I was not happy to accept nor to deal with. But now, since the re-recording has been announced and released, teasing us with some of the singles on these re-recorded songs like Money and Us and Them, I'm going to read off to you what Roger himself had decided to say on his website. And he says, and I quote, "When we recorded the stripped down songs for the lockdown sessions, the 50th anniversary of the release of The Dark Side of the Moon was looming on the horizon. It occurred to me that The Dark Side of the Moon could well be suitable candidate for a similar reworking, partly as a tribute to the original work, but also to readdress the political and emotional message of the whole album. I discussed it with Gus and Sean, and when we'd stopped giggling and shouting, 'You must be fucking mad,' at one another, we decided to take it on. It's turned out really great, and I'm excited for everyone to hear it. It's not a replacement for the original, which obviously is irreplaceable, but it is a way for the now 80-year-old man to look back across the intervening 50 years into the eyes of a 80-year-old Waters and say, to quote a poem of mine about my father, 'We did our best, we kept his trust, our dad would have been proud of us, and also it is a way for me to honour a recording that Nick and Rick and Dave and I have every right to be very proud of.' So that has been given me more of the chances to share with you what I would be eventually talk about to this point. So, with the redux of The Dark Side of the Moon being officially released worldwide, I'm going to say my own personal thoughts. The first time I listened to it, I was not really impressed. And yes, it is a different sounding record, and I didn't care for what was going on because of its very pedestrian and highly repetitive similarities around the instrumentation, and with the added pieces that are new to this redux of poetry that Roger decided to completely think about just to put in with the overall themes around this record. So I wasn't really interested to come back to it, but after looking back into some more of these scathing negative reviews and to think about why Roger had decided to make this, after like an hour or 2 hours, I decided to play it again. I have given this redux 2 spins, and the second time I thought that my reactions were pretty much almost exactly the same, but there was a change of mood when I would eventually realize that you cannot even think about predictability of what you want to hear to celebrate an anniversary of an iconic album, but to think about this Redux as a different spotlight. With the original version of The Dark Side of the Moon, everyone knows about this album. I've said this before, and they were still spreading around comments that the original version has been known as one of the greatest things of all time, but to completely be against what the Redux had to offer. So I decided for this video not to compare way too much around the original version of Darkside and to only go into what I really think about the Redux. After my second full listening, it fully made me think about this even deeper than before. Because a classic album has been known as a classic album, do we really think that a re-recording of the same things, the same voices, the same structures, the same sounds, the same pieces of everything that has been documented to be added as a re-recording would be a good idea? Do you think that will be something new or as original? That is boring and way too predictable. Art is not always for anything that can be something that you want, and besides of which that we have all shared our own opinions around Roger Waters for who he is as a political person to what he wants to do as a musician, but you absolutely cannot disrespect for the fact that Roger's artistic expression to detail and his own impact still resonates for many music fans. And as a massive Pink Floyd fanatic myself, yet alone not completely avoiding this Redux for listening to it, I personally find that the Redux of The Dark Side of the Moon is, yes, as different and totally, full of this ambition and what you want something to be up to your satisfaction that turns out not to be something that you want. This Redux has been a big interesting product. I was so away from the whole idea to begin with, but now that it was released eventually, there was the point of reaction that I'm not going to listen to it type of mood. When I said that to myself, that has been close-minded just because of reading the news without listening to the singles prior to the album's release. When the whole thing came out, I want the whole thing to be a somewhat pleasurable and yet something that I want to try and give it a chance to. After the whole thing, listening to it front to back, I'm going to be saying what I think of this whole project. The instrumentation around this Redux is a big surprise. Everything around this Redux has been very slow, and it did not need nor want to be as intensifying and as dramatic. The lyrical content stays the same. Not everything has to be completely changed. The lyrics from the main themes around the human condition, the aspects of life, the inevitable to the music industry, has been changed with some new additional ideas. So the themes have stayed in its right positions. The musicians who have worked around this choice of what Roger wanted to make, I think they've pulled it off very, very well. Every single member who worked with this record have done a great job. The production is as polished, as clear, and as very cozy and warm and as gentle. It's not like as dramatic or over the top and as highly progressive like this, but the way Roger wanted to make this, he wanted it to be as the interpretation around today's point of view, but through the eyes and faces of a new generation to discover Dark Side of the Moon in this new way. And after looking into what Roger's thoughts are and his reasonings why he decided to complete this, it does make more sense to me than for me to be a Pink Floyd fan and be so against this proportion. Close-mindedness without even listening to it and not giving it a chance is something that I have later on learned to not always be in that mindset, but to be mature and to accept the growth of maturity and to give anything a chance. As biased and as cliche that it is, we always know and love the classic version of this album. Now, we all would like to stick to appreciate the original version. Yes, it is a milestone. It is a classic. But this new Redux is definitely something that you would not personally want to hear. But I know for a fact, for anyone's point of view, that you would just want to give it a chance. If you are both or either a Pink Floyd fan or a fan of Roger Waters or just a fan of both of those things, there's no denying for a choice that you want to make that you could maybe want to give it a listen. Give it a chance. Because with this Redux, it did not need to sound like Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd have been the past. Let the original Dark Side of the Moon stay there. It is the past, and let the whole re-recording of the Dark Side of the Moon be the new beginning, like a new form of artistic expressions to be unapologetic and be as acceptable. Just like with this album, Lulu by Lou Reed and Metallica, nobody wanted something to happen through this kind of detail and its own purpose. But later on, some people would eventually love this and to fully invest and understand. And I bet that's going to be happening in the same way with this re-recording put together 100%. Various multiplying opinions around negativity on this Redux has been a constant and unstoppable sight to behold. And I did predict that it was going to flop. When I made that video, when I was not happy with the news on re-recording this album, I did predict that it will flop, and I'm surprised that it did happen. So now, after looking into this, there are points from what I said that I really do want to take back. The whole Redux, in my opinion, was so ambitious, and it has a different light. It has a different introspective direction. Do I think this Redux is as bad as many people say that it is? And the answer is no. Because something is totally different, but at the same time, now that I've listened to this whole thing, from start to finish, it has made me become a music fan that wants to learn, to respect, and to appreciate anything that can be good for a music fan and listener. But if a musician is happy with what they want to do, that is great. And as I said before, it's Roger Waters' baby. It has been his project. Pink Floyd wouldn't have continued if it wasn't for Roger Waters, but that argument would lead to say that Roger Waters has been Pink Floyd, which is not true. Roger took over Pink Floyd after Syd Barrett's departure, and with the rest of the band, who would team up to work in a very workaholic and progressing nature to improve and move forward from the aftermath of Barrett's departure. And what they've learned is to be a team, to work and accomplish. Later on, releasing countless amounts of classic records like Dark Side of the Moon and the other obvious highlighted, celebrated records. But now that Pink Floyd has been moved away, since Roger has moved on to do his own thing, the Dark Side of the Moon has been his own work while being so productive and very dedicated move. And with Roger Waters doing something like this, I'm sure that many Floyd fans and Roger fans would really enjoy this. Because I know that this is going to be more of a mixed bag for so many people. The highlights that I can give it for, like I said about the musicianship and the production, some of the songs that have been done in this way that I do like. I like the instrumentation a lot around Breathe and with Time, with Us and Them. Us and Them, for me, not only my favourite song on the album, but this Redux version is nothing way too changeable, and yet most of the entirety of this Redux has been packed with different sounds of keys, different keys of the songs, and a separate mood. But I think the Us and Them Redux version is the highlight. The sound quality is huge and very soft, spacious, and it gives this Redux a lot more of its slow and yet bigger breaths of fresh air. It's not predictable, and I do like it for that. And the highlights have been the ones that I do enjoy the most. The poetry parts around the Redux at first was really strange and weird, but it's full of the consciousness. It's full of, like I said, the interpretation that is really huge on this version of Dark Side. It's got its own newer take, why these themes are still relevant and powerful. The weaker moments on this version, I am not keen around the versions through Money and The Grey Gig in the Sky and On the Run very much. They are so average at best. The newer, different tonality of the instruments for On the Run, I liked when the synthesizers do create another another vision of itself. And I did like the abrupt change from being a mostly synthesizer made piece and then changing it into growing some more and adding more sounds. The poetry can be interesting, but at the same time, in my own opinion, it didn't really connect with me. This version of The Grey Gig in the Sky, for me, has not really been as one of the best ones, because I think the vocal effects that have been included in this style has not been as touching and as unique. It's more of a darker, deeper, mournful presence, if you like to call it that. It's got its own separate emotions, but it never touched me as successfully. And Money, it meandered way too long, especially with the constant looping of the same pieces of the main structure that went on. But I did like the sound of it being quite slowed down, but I like that the bass and the guitar makes it kind of bluesy in the same way like the original version did. It's cool to hear more of the playing from Roger's bass parts on the new version of Any Color You Like. That's pretty decent as well. The other songs have been, like I said, the separate, different key changes, but into a new vision. It's newer, a newer purpose to make this Redux a newer form of itself. These other songs that have been re-recorded didn't happen so loudly or too dramatically because it didn't want it to be. Roger didn't want it to be exactly the same. As I said earlier, it's not a copy and paste, and it's not a remake. It's the way that Waters has been so determined to put his newer style of this project that I do really appreciate what he wanted to make with this. So the overall thing, the whole thing on this Redux, to me, is not terrible. And don't get me started on some of these overreacted negative comments. This is not as disgustingly awful or as a pile of Muzak garbage like ones that you consider to be some of the worst pieces of music of all time. This is not as bad as the other albums that have been known as one of the worst ever. Angelic to the Core, to the nostalgia critics version of The Wall, that atrocious parody. This Redux is so much more listenable. Obviously, I would not listen to badly reviewed, badly received albums just to try and get them to a better status of opinion because they're so bad. With underrated ones, there are many other records that loads of people love that I don't care about. And that happens the other way round too. Records that people don't like that I do love. But I think this release project of The Dark Side of the Moon's Redux has absolutely been, at this moment, despised. So I am very interested to see what you think of this Redux. Please let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. Do you like it? Do you not like it? If it's going to be full of negativity with what you think, that is so much of an acceptable proportion of an opinion that you want to express. And it's so obvious that some people would just listen to it, or maybe not even listen to it, and just crap on it straight away. It's not a record that it's for you, but if you really want to try it again and again, give it a shot. The Dark Side of the Moon Redux has been, for me, a mixed bag. I didn't love it. I didn't love the whole thing because of the flaws that I have addressed. And it did feel repetitive in the similar ways. But with the positives, it has been actually a pretty good choice. A listening that I do think to myself that it's great for the effort. The execution was there. I thought the execution of the whole thing at first was going to be very bad, just because of what I originally thought of with the re-recording idea for this album. But once I really got into it, just to get a proper reaction for me and to say these things on camera, it makes me better to think this obvious line of you don't judge a book by its cover, yet being so cliche, it actually speaks more truths than to move away from something that you thought was going to be a bad thing. Anyways, that's all I would like to say around this. To me, it's average, it's not perfect, but it is not as awful as some people would think of it like that. Please address your views around this Redux, and I'm interested to know if there are any Pink Floyd or Roger Waters fans, or both, as I mentioned earlier, that do like this. Obviously, with me, I do admire this record, but that does not mean that I will be avoiding the newer vision, the newer artistic and highly productive work of this interpretation through this legend of an album. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll keep you guys posted for more videos in the near future.